Welcome to the Enlighten Up podcast, where I am going to take you into a deep exploration of what it means to exist in this current reality. We are going to raise your vibes, open your mind, expand your heart, and dive deep into the wondrous mysteries and possibilities of this lifetime. There's been a spiritual catalyst that has set in motion the awakening process of many across the globe to return to the knowingness of self and unite what has been separated. Together, we're going to bring light into that darkness. We're going to remember the joy of living. But most of all, we're going to turn up the volume of our own eternal power and do the thing we're here to do. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Enlighten Up podcast. Today, I am joined by Dayna Dunbar, an award-winning novelist published by Ballantine Books, and we're going to discuss her most recent novel, Awake, which is a spiritual and sci-fi thriller based off an encounter she had with ETs in the Sedona desert many years ago. Dayna, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Nicole. It's great to be here with you.
It's great to be here with you too. Thank you. I dove into your book a little bit and I really enjoy your writing style. And I find the story that you're sharing to be quite fascinating, and it quickly pulls you in. Mm-hmm. There's so much detail in here that one of the things that I was impressed by is the details that you're sharing at the level of understanding that there's a lot that you're writing about is off planet while also on planet Earth. Right. And so before we kind of get into all of that, the book was inspired by a very mythical, but also mysterious and also life-changing experience that you had. Can you share with us what that was like for you?
Yes. Yeah, that was so amazing. I went on a camping trip with my then girlfriend at the time, Chris, and we went and camped in Sedona, just up outside of town.
How long ago was this?
This was in the summer of 1994.
Okay.
So quite a while ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it was, you can't even really get up to where I was anymore. It's almost impassable, the road now. And they certainly don't let you camp or make fires or anything up there. So it was total dry camping. And we went up to this spot that a friend of mine told me about, like this secret spot. There was a medicine wheel already on the place. And it was like a plateau of slick rock, red rock, surrounded 360 degrees with red rock spires. Truly magical place. We had an amazing time, 2 or 3 days. One day we went into town, and as you do in Sedona, you went to a New Age bookstore and did a meditation with a man who we found out later had written a book about visitations in Sedona, alien visitations. And during that meditation, called in a mothership to come and hover over the building. And Chris and I just looked at each other and we're like, oh my gosh, it's so Sedona, this is awesome. And, was not, I thought surely there has to be other life in the multitude of galaxies, but wasn't something that I was pursuing, at all. I thought people who had said they had contacts were probably not in their right mind, et cetera. Very grounded. And that night, was looking up at the stars and saw a light start to move. And I said, oh my God, it's moving. It was in the Scorpio constellation, like it was in that area of the sky, kind of on the horizon, a little bit of an orange hue to it. And Chris turned and said, oh my God, it is. And something inside of me, I guess, because we had just been so open and so connected to nature, and we'd done some work in the medicine wheel, with, just getting deeply connected, ceremonial. And I just said, we see you. If you want to communicate, we're here. And right then it started to turn around. It kind of was moving away from us in this S-shaped pattern. Right when I said that, it started to turn around, and it came and just hovered right in front of us. And then we saw, it seemed like they just appeared out of nowhere, too, almost like sentries, little sentries, that were on either side of it. And then the big one was in the middle, right in front of us. And I got scared, and I said, they want to talk to you. Because Chris had done, she had astral traveled one time, and I thought, oh, she's way more advanced than I am, and so they must be here for her. That was just some self-doubt. Now I look back at it and go, that was weird, but at the time, I got kind of scared about it. And so she said, okay. And she actually went out to the medicine wheel, and she laid down in the medicine wheel, because that's how she meditates. And I saw a beam of light come out of her body and go up to the ship, and then circle back down. And
So it was like a connection then, like a
yes, it was
looping
like a
connection.
looping connection. It was almost like, she was able to travel up, but something was connecting her to her body at the same time.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so, yeah, and I was just like, you be good to her. And I heard a voice that said, don't worry, we will. And I, and at that time, I again was just breathless. And I said, oh my God, Kaya, is that you? Because for the previous 6 months in meditation, I was just doing like sitting in kind of mindfulness practice, following my breath. I had a being come to me every time I closed my eyes in meditation, and would just be there in front of me. I couldn't see her, I could just feel her presence, and she would just sit with me. And she told me her name was Kaya, and she was just filled with love and light. And I had never had anything like this happen before. I'd heard of things like this, so I was like, okay, this is amazing. And it was a beautiful experience. And I told a few of my friends, I have no idea what this is about, but this amazing being keeps coming to me. Well, in that moment, I realized it was her, and she said, yes, it is. And later I understood that she had been preparing me for 6 months, because there's no time to these beings for this encounter. And so that I wouldn't completely freak out. And so as Chris is having her experience, I sat and telepathically spoke with Kaya and asked all the kind of questions you would ask of, like, why are you here? You know, where are you from? And she said that they were here because this is basically a hot spot in the universe, that we are in a transition period in consciousness and evolution on the planet that is a make or break, that we could either really come out of this and move into the next dimension, or it could fail. And they are here to not only witness what's going to happen, because there's never really been a planet that's kind of gone quite this dark before. And so to see us and veiled quite this much, and then to be able to come out of it. So but also they're here to hold the light. They're here holding for us, but they're not, she said they would not be interfering directly. They're not going to land on the White House lawn and, that kind of a thing. That race anyway, I don't know about all of them, but these beings. And so, and then we just sat in just like this incredible loving presence. And, and it kind of just was in, this bliss state. And then I saw the light stop, and Chris got up and came back over, and she told me her experience, which I don't really share because that's her experience, but it was a beautiful experience. She met this male being, and it was, incredibly profound for her. And I said, well, I was in the middle of something, so I would like to continue. And she said, okay. And I went out to the medicine wheel myself, and I sat down, and I said, I just looked up and I said, okay, I'm ready to come up. And Kaya, it was kind of like hold, and I could tell she was kind of talking to the other beings, kind of communicating, and she came back to me and she said, "You can't come here. You're not ready. It would be too much for your energy body." And I said, I was so disappointed. I said, "Chris got to, why not?" And I said, "Okay, well, can you come here?" And she said, just like with this joy, she said, "Yes, I can." And I realized later that if I hadn't have asked, she wouldn't have come. So at that point, I closed my eyes again because that's how I'd always talk to her, and immediately I felt her presence more than I'd ever felt it before. It was just so profound, to the point that I was like, opened my eyes, and I saw an outline of her face and her neck and her shoulder, just this like filament of light. She was in
So
her.
your eyes were physically open and you saw that in front of you?
Yes, yeah, I saw her in front of me, but just this, because she was in her energy body. So it was just this little outline of light on the side, and it was dark out. The only light we really had was it was a dark night from the stars and from the campfire behind me. And so and it was just like so beautiful. And then possibly the most beautiful thing of the whole night happened, and that was the smoke from the campfire came over and wafted over her body. And it, how when you hold a flashlight into smoke, you can see the beam completely, like it's almost solid. So that's what happened with her energy body. The smoke filled in her face and her
Oh, she
torso.
did that for you.
Yeah, I mean, it just, the wind blew the smoke
Oh,
over her.
she controlled that. I'm
Right?
getting a very, very strong like that.
Yeah,
She did that
yes,
purposely
maybe
for
so.
you.
Right,
Mhm.
right. And it just blew, and it was just like, and this is in the book, in the novel. This whole thing is in the novel when the characters meet the alien beings, and I just was like, oh my God. And she was so beautiful. Her eye, she had a kind of a larger eye. She didn't have any hair. Had this very, very long, elongated frame, and just beautiful. And, and she was so, it was like she was so madly in love with me, like this, like if I saw like the most precious little baby panda in the wild, and just was like, oh my God, she just had this awe for me. And this, it was, and just wanted to touch me, wanted to hold me. And so she reached her hand out and she put it on my shoulder right here, and it went into my body. And my energy field went like this, like woo, like this. I couldn't handle her vibration inside of me, and I said, "You can't touch me." And so she pulled her hand away, and she was kind of, I could tell she was kind of disappointed because she just wanted to scoop me up and hold me. And so then she said, "Okay, that I won't." And then we really just sat there in this just blissful love, like I've never experienced love like that, and again in my life. And it was so profound. And then at one
Wow.
point,
I'm chuckling a little bit because I don't know if you noticed this, but your camera's been disabled. So it's saying that the video is going to be coming through,
uh-huh.
but it happened just as you were talking about this. And it's funny because I can tell that the energy that you're sharing right now, there, UK, so you're back. The energy that you've been sharing completely disabled your Wi-Fi. Like it totally lowered the connection. So it's funny that this happens, but I knew instantly it was because of the vibration of your words and the energy you were sharing. You were tapping right back into that moment So you are
Yes.
bringing forth that energy right now.
It's so crazy because I have like super fast Wi-Fi too,
I,
It's like,
yeah, no, I know. It's why I've had to get a hard line now. I cannot depend
really?
on my Wi-Fi.
I heard you
So,
say that, I think, in
mhm.
another podcast where, this can happen. Oh no. Well, what should we do?
Yeah, no, you're fine. No, you're totally fine. Don't worry. It's saying it's fine. But I just wanted the audience to know because I don't know if it'll actually pick up for them. But that's just kind of speaks to the power of your experience and the energy that you're bringing through. So I'm sure the audience could feel it. My audience is pretty tuned in. They could feel like the power behind what you just shared and your
Mhm.
actual experience. That's absolutely beautiful. It's these experiences, there's so you hear about them and so many people were like, oh, I want to experience it too. What do you say to someone when I'm sure you must have heard that as well, like, oh, like, how did you do it, or what do I need to do? And
Yeah.
what would your answer be to that?
It's never happened to me again.
Hmm.
So, of course I would love it as well. It felt like there were some things that lined up. For some reason, there was they wanted me to write this book. They wanted me to share in the form of a really fun, fast paced adventure type story about them, and so that it would have the chance to reach a mainstream audience rather than a book like, here's about aliens, nonfiction, book about aliens, or um, even spiritual teaching. People who read Eckhart Tolle, may not ever be a mainstream audience, and that's the intention of this book, is to reach people who would never necessarily read spiritual people. So I think that lined up. I also think being in nature like that, like being away from and in that vibration. Obviously, Sedona is a massive vortex of energy, and I think a portal. So going to places like that, being outside, camping. Um, I know there are some groups who say they can contact and you can have experiences with them. ESETI is one. And I do think that love that I was sharing with my girlfriend was a big part of it too.
Hmm.
It was just like
Hmm.
so much love, and we did do ceremony in the medicine wheel. We did some dance. We were kind of pulling down celestial energy and grounding it into our bodies, putting on some really beautiful kind of spiritual music that I think raised the vibration as well. I think all of that made it where I've always wondered if other people saw the the ships that we saw that night, or if there was something about all this where they could appear to us and not to everybody else because we had raised up into a dimension where we could see them.
Yeah.
I mean, people see ships all the time in Sedona, but
Yeah.
I think all of those things came together.
Yeah, and especially if you're still new on your own journey, it makes sense that perhaps a location on land that you may have an affinity towards, like your soul may be somehow, there may be some kind of connection there on a soul level for you. One of my earliest mentors, who I'm actually writing about in my next book right now, her and I actually met up a few years ago after not seeing her for, oh gosh, maybe 15 years.
Mm,
And I was actually talking to her about maybe going to Sedona, and I think I had already been to Sedona at that point. But she said to me, and it was really good advice. And she said, Nicole, she goes, you don't need the portals of Sedona anymore. She goes,
mhm.
you are your own portal. And I
Right.
think that's ultimately where a lot of us are going. But that's not to diminish the experience that one can have on the land if you're not at that place where you know how to work your own energy field.
Yes, if you
And
haven't developed your, that's true. And I was quite young
mhm,
at the time, and so just really new to all this. So really, it's kind of like almost like plant medicine. People, talk about doing ayahuasca, and it opens them up to levels that they hadn't experienced before. And then at some point, you can get to a place where you have access without needing the assistance.
Yeah.
So
And I think they're gateways, and they can
yeah,
open the door of possibility so that you know what is possible, and what you can tap into again. So I don't
right.
think there's anything wrong with it. I don't think like it's, some people may refer to it as like a codependency or something. I don't think of it that way at all. I think there's always a time and place for certain things in everyone's journey, and there's
Yeah,
no judgment whatsoever.
yeah,
So when you have this experience with Kaya, who is in the book. I love her role. She sounds super badass.
yeah.
Um, okay, so what is the reason, like, what is their main reason for wanting you to share their information through the story? Like, what's the major purpose for them for you to
Yes.
do this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's interesting because at the time, um, I didn't know that one of the purposes would be what it is, but it's become very very clear. And the timing of this is that it finally, because it wasn't until 20 years later that I got the guidance to go ahead and write this, that I was ready. Because I started and I wrote other books. I knew I wasn't ready to write about an awakened civilization and make it into a story that made sense and wasn't preachy and was cool and fun and hip and adventurous. And so I wrote other books based on my life. Growing up in Oklahoma, I have some Southern fiction, and I wrote screenplays, etc. And so I taught myself to write, and I did a lot of spiritual practice as well to be ready. So finally, I was given guidance to go ahead. And what I knew right away, because I got guidance that I would write this right away the next day when I journaled about it. It was like, you're going to write about this one day, and in story form. And I knew that it was supposed to be that they wanted the principles, their principles, and the knowledge that they exist to be hit a more mainstream audience, people that might not be like you and me, who will read spiritual nonfiction till the cows come home. People like to get this into a novel form that's super fun, fast paced, exciting, Indiana Jones, Da Vinci Code kind of feel. Um, then it can reach just a much wider audience. And everybody's like, it has to be a movie. It has to be a movie. And then it would reach even a bigger audience. But so that was really the purpose. What I didn't know at the time was that I'm also being given this mission, and I've like this has come to me in the past 10 years or so, that to try to rescue story from the egoic vice grip that it's been taken over by. Because when I was growing up, story was not nearly this dark and as it is now. I know your audience relates turning on Netflix, any kind of even finding a novel. I mean, how many serial killers can we be exposed to? It's like, I call it sociopaths on parade. It's like it's really rough, and the most luminous people in Hollywood are participating in this level of storytelling that is just taking it. They're trying to one up each other, and how dark and depraved they can.
That was an interesting choice of words you just used there. The most luminous people in Hollywood are partaking or promoting
Yeah.
in that kind of like storytelling, the darker storytelling.
Yeah, and when I say
What?
that, I mean like Bradley Cooper and Kate Blanchett are just in this movie Nightmare Alley. Guillermo del Toro, who I adore, his like Shape of Water was stunning. I'm just like, you guys, like, what's happening here? We this is such an important topic. What you're putting out, what we're putting out, and and then what others are taking in, the vision we see of humanity that is just, it's so important. There's a media theorist named George Gerbner, really renowned media theorist, and he said, whoever tells the stories of a culture really governs human behavior. And that's really been the case throughout
Mhm.
history. Jesus knew what story meant, how to use story to uplift and inspire and teach. and entertain. And it's just gotten off the rails. So that's part of the purpose, I believe, as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's a really profound statement that you shared from him. Like, I think that when it comes to storytelling, whether it's truth or fictional or a mixture of both, that there has to be some level of responsibility behind anyone who's involved in that story, and delivering it. And because our minds are so impressionable and we tend to soak up storytelling, I've got some people coming on my show shortly, and he told me, he said, Nicole, facts tell, stories sell.
Hmm.
And he couldn't have been more right. And there's a reason why anyone who knows how to tell a good story is never going to go hungry a day in their life.
Mm.
People will eat that up and drink it up like they're starving or they're thirsty beyond hydration.
Yes.
And I think that we have to understand as a collective society, like what kind of storytelling do you want to participate in that you are literally either nourishing someone's mind, or you could be depleting them of the nourishment that could be there.
Yeah.
How do you think Hollywood and just the entertainment industry in general has shifted in a way that perhaps is not so much on the nourishing end as it could be?
Hmm. It's interesting. Listening to your podcast has really kind of clarified this for me. I listened to your podcast with the woman who, her name is, a single word, starts with an A. How do you say her name? Uh,
Amira?
um, no, she's
Oh.
the tech person who started, helped start virtual reality.
Oh, yes, Amalea, but she used a different name on
Yeah,
that particular.
right. Yeah, yeah. It's like a virtual name,
We
right?
talked about the metaverse.
Yeah, the metaverse. Yeah. So
Yes.
what I realized, it just clarified so clearly in my mind, is that as we have gotten more and more since the beginning, really, of the internet and social media, we've gotten more and more disconnected from each other. We've gotten there's a deeper and deeper cynicism about humanity. We've become much more critical. The discourse, the level of discourse, is at an all time low. And well, I don't know about cavemen, how they talk to each other, but it's really really gotten out of hand. And so that I think that kind of lack of empathy for each other is showing up. Hollywood's always been a mirror for society, and actually drives the narrative, but also mirrors it too. And so I think that's what we're seeing a lot. And this disconnection and this willingness to show the darkest possible sides of ourselves, instead of a visionary, where story has always been, is it's always been mythic and aspirational and visionary. Like, where can we go? And it's now the other way. It's really driving us into the ground. It's a very dystopian vision. Earth as a ruined planet, human beings as parasitic greed monsters, basically.
Oh,
Uh,
could we talk about that? Because that is one that drives me bonkers. It drives me absolutely nuts, that we're being sold a narrative that we as humans are parasites on this earth.
right. Yes, that's a huge narrative. Yeah, it is. And, that is something that, if we keep telling ourselves that story, it
We'll
really
become
is.
it.
What are we telling ourselves
Mhm.
about this? And I think that our values, have gotten out of, really skewed. What I feel like, and I feel like is going to happen, is what happens in the novel. I had visions come to me, like so many visions of what an evolution of consciousness would look like with any race of beings that is similar to ours. So in Awake, the Akarans start out in it's they're in the ravaging era, and that's basically where we're at now. And then they have a they break it breaks down so badly. Their society breaks down so badly. All their structures break down so much. There's so much warring, even people, fighting for the last resources. That, but then there are these beings that are called the wise ones who decide they just surrender. They just surrender. It's like, I'm forgiving. We're forgiving all of the past. There are all of these grievances we all have as nations and societies and races, and they just say, we're just forgiving it all. We're just absolutely, forgiveness is the bridge. And they walk away from the whole madness and they go into what's called vital zones, and the last kind of places on the planet that are still livable, where they can grow their own food and they can have some sort of clean air, and they facilitate healing from the trauma and awakening. And when enough of them wake up, it reaches a transition, a tipping point that then spreads across. It's kind of the 100th monkey effect, if you know that story, where it spreads across the planet and it creates an awakening across civilization. And that's how they're able to survive and come back. And that's called the rebirthing. So the story takes place 1,000 years after the rebirthing. And it's just a rip roaring adventure about how they come to Earth to save the planet from the end of the world of December 21st, 2012. So it takes place partly in Guatemala, going through a geo-quest of trying to find this death doomsday device that's buried in a Mayan pyramid, and then going back and forth to the planet Akara and seeing their civilization and what it's like. So the vital zones keep coming forward for me as something that's so important for us. And when I hear the talk about the metaverse and us possibly losing our own biological sovereignty, and losing ourselves in this other matrix that's being created by, the powers that be, um, I think, wow, I think there's going to be an alternative. And I'm not sure how it's going to come together with technology, because I don't think technology has to be walked away from. I think it's important, but for people to start vital zones where we just check out, we're just like, okay, we're not participating in that kind of consciousness any longer. We're moving out. We're going to come together as communities and support each other and support our healing from the trauma of our ancestral trauma, our karmic trauma of living on this planet in the levels of veiled consciousness that we have, and our personal trauma. And so and facilitate each other's healing and waking up. And the people who wake up are then going to be the ones who are tilling the ground and gardening and doing the things, whatever it is that helps to support the situation, in addition to helping heal. And others come up, we help them heal, and then they start to participate. That's the vision that I see happening. I think it's going to be a major alternative.
Yeah, and I think we can already see that right now, given everything that's happening on the planet. With we're seeing food shortage, supplies, and all of that. Whether it doesn't really matter how manipulated that all is or not. What I think it's doing, because I do believe it's part of the whole process, is that it's catalyzing an effect within many of us to want to learn how to take care of ourselves, to be self-sustaining. And I think we've lost touch with what self-sustaining actually is, and our connection to the land. And this is all kind of pushing us back to that. So as awful as, like, we can look at things and how horrible things are going, it is pushing us to look for different solutions that perhaps, we maybe should have never left behind in the first place, but we did because we have given a lot of our own sovereignty away to the king of convenience,
Yeah.
right? The king of
Yes.
convenience has
And
really
comfort.
ruled,
Yeah.
yeah, all of us. And so I see that happening. So it's really interesting that that's come through. Now, was that some of the information that was kind of downloaded to you to share?
Yes, yes. And another thing that has to do with technology that's really, really important, because again, I don't think that technology is bad in and of itself,
Hmm.
is that the we are not at a consciousness where we can handle the technology that we have right now. It is being taken over by greed and power. It's like at any time there can be technology used to amass huge sums of money, or have more power and influence. That's it's too tempting for the consciousness that is in charge right now. So the awakening has to occur, and this is the really good news, is that the tipping point doesn't have to be a majority of people.
Mm-mm, it never is.
It doesn't have to be the majority of
Mm-mm.
people. In our book, it's like 1% really wake up to the full oneness consciousness, and that's what spreads around.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because when, I've studied Dr. David Hawkins' levels of consciousness.
Yes.
And this has been a huge part of my awakening, even from when I was I got a hold of that information in my early 20s, so over 20 years ago. And that scale of consciousness is really helpful in understanding that it only takes one person at the level of, even if we're talking love,
Right.
which is a level of 500, that means you now have the power to counteract the negative energy or frequency or people in destructive consciousness to 750 million people,
Yeah.
you as one person. And so it makes sense. We don't need to have a majority of people. What
Right.
we need to just have is an elevated state of consciousness that is so powerful, it almost permeates into the field and helps to shift uh, how people are behaving, allowing them to see things differently. A
Yes.
lot of this comes down to perspective. As soon as people's perspectives shift or eyes open to more of what's going around, I think there's a really kind of myopic tunnel that a lot of us look at life through. In some of us in more ways than others, but this kind of help expands that so that you have not just 180-degree view, but a 360-degree view, right? Because our pineal gland sees all.
Right. Right. Yes, absolutely. It's an elevated level of consciousness, and out of that can come technologies that facilitate the cleaning up of the planet, that facilitate the empowerment of everyone rather than a few, and don't mirror the coarse consciousness that we're in right now, which is the pollution in the air. Is our consciousness is mirrored by the technologies that we're using. So in the book, this was downloaded to me very, you know, really, really strongly over a number of years. And I have to say, my co-author, Julia Nadine Powder, who's not here, I have to give her so much thanks because she came in and really helped me to clarify this and to get it on the page. So, but the torus technology, TORUS, so sacred geometry, it's the shape of everything from atoms to galaxies to the consciousness in our central channel that
Hmm.
comes up like this and then goes out. The torus, it's like a donut with an empty center, and out of the center is the manifestation, and really the whole thing is just made of energy, vibrating energy. And that technology, it's like a mini universe. Can There can be technology that's used to harness the quantum field and create a self-sustaining energy source that can be used in everything from computers to houses to powering the grid. So that was shown to me, and it was so wild, Nicole, because I was seeing shown all this, and I had no idea what it was called. And I
Mhm.
started talking to a friend of mine who's a really visionary guy. And he told me, he said, "Oh, that's called a Taurus." And so I started looking it up and I'm like, oh yeah, there's, people who are like, doing this work already. So, but what happens on Akara is they wake up, and then out of their higher consciousness arises the technology that then supports the awakening.
Now, Akara is a planet in the Pleiades star cluster.
Right. That's the planet. That's what we named it. It's
Okay.
not one that I'm going and I'm visiting all the time.
Ye
I'm just going to be
mhm.
really real. It's like it's a fictional planet, even though it's based on the being that I met,
Okay.
and the downloads that I got afterwards. Yeah.
Okay. So this fictionally takes place in the Pleiades star cluster on a fictional planet called Akara.
Right.
I
Exactly.
love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Well, just even that you getting those downloads and then being able to verify the truth of the downloads
Yeah.
is in itself a very spiritual experience. Because I remember when I had a dream that I was on a ship and I was going through what looked like the Milky Way galaxy, and going towards what looked like an Earth like planet, but it wasn't Earth. And there was all this grease that started to come onto the front of the window. And I remember seeing, like, oh my gosh, I know I'm in a dream now. Like
Hmm.
there's no grease in the Milky Way.
Right.
But then I found out, sure enough, that yeah, there is. And there's like these, yeah, it's like I don't know what kind of substance it is, but it's got like an oily substance. And so when you get that kind of clarification, you really start to wonder, okay, what else can I get my hands on, like information wise, if
Right.
I'm really truly connected.
That's right.
And I think, we're in a time right now too that is pretty scary in many ways, and then also not, but it causes us to want to look outside of ourselves for so much information, like looking to someone else who's an authority to tell me everything's going to be okay, or
Yes.
tell me that this is happening so I know eventually it's going to be okay. And we're constantly looking outside of ourselves for the information, but I think the biggest lesson that is so important at this time, because I look into, like, even just like our spiritual community, there are a lot of people out there putting out really bad information. I
Mhm.
mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to sometimes figure out that some of this stuff is just flat out made up
Yeah.
or not true or designed to be misinformation.
Right.
And then there's other times where people maybe just don't even realize what they're doing. They're just unknowingly putting out misinformation. They feel that it's true, or they think it's true. They heard it from somewhere,
Yeah.
but we're in a time where you have to be very discerning. And until you know what your own truth is internally, you
Yeah.
will never know that vibration intimately enough to know when it's outside of you or not.
Right. It's so true. And I love what you're saying. And it really relates back to the novel. And I just had an awareness from what you were saying. I think that it's a story in part. So it's not telling people what their truth is. It's telling this in a story, and this is a race of beings, and this is how they did it. But the main um, slogan, the thing that they say to each other all the time in the book is access the wisdom. You access the wisdom. You have access to the wisdom. It's make the leap from data to information to knowledge to wisdom, access the wisdom. And so I think that's the other thing about story. It can show and not tell. It can show the possibility, and then you get to live into whatever your truth is, because it's so true. We have to go within, and there's so much content being blasted all the time. And I think it relates to the simplicity. There's a return to innocence that I think is so important. Getting back to the land, getting in nature, and accessing your own inner guidance, and not everything that you're seeing on Instagram. It's like it's really important that we get ourselves grounded in our own truth and our own integrity. What is true for us? And that will lead us into um, truth. That's where the truth lies, because we are that. We are the divine. So that's where,
Yeah, what I've picked up from your novel so far is that there's some kind of the way your storytelling is coming across is where it inspires the hero or the heroine within you
that's,
to awaken
that's right.
and for you to discover what that means for you. You know, in your book you talk about entelechy. Is that how you say it?
Eliki. Yes.
Okay. Is that something that is fictional to the book, or have you picked that up through any downloads? Like, what is like? Talk about that to the audience.
Yes, no, that is not fictional. And teleki is that which is within us, the seed within us that we are born with, to that is going to manifest if we nurture it into the natural outflowing of our purpose on the planet. So the entelechy of an acorn is to become an oak tree. It's born into this little thing to become this magnificent tree that is within each of us. So on Akara, one of the things that they do is they send their young people to Entelechy Academy so that they get to find out what it is that's inside of them, their heart's calling, their soul's divine purpose, and then they help them find what that is, and then they facilitate them exploring that and having that come to fruition.
Wouldn't it be so incredible if our schooling system operated under that, mantra?
Yes, yes. And that education, which comes from the word educare, which means to call forth from within.
Mm.
It's not to give information and to download our conditioning onto you so that you fit into society. It's to call forth your own wisdom, your own natural entelechy from within. And that's a big part of the shift in what the vision, like this is the kind of stuff where, and I know there are groups doing this and I participate in one, visioning the future. And that to me is a huge vision of the future. Also sacred economics is part of the Akaran culture, how their economic system works. And that is, they are awake to oneness consciousness. So when they go into a market to get food, there is nobody there taking money because they don't take more than they need. Everybody takes only what they need. So there, it's if you are hurting another person, you are literally hurting yourself. If you're taking from somebody else, you're taking from yourself. If you're putting them down and trying to, it doesn't work that way that you get elevated. So yeah, there's a lot in
That
how this could work.
that takes me right back to the beginning of COVID in 2020 March when toilet paper was the most coveted
Yeah,
product to purchase,
right.
and how like people like you'd walk into the supermarket and you could feel it. It's like there was so much fear of lack
Yes.
that people were buying up things that they didn't want. I myself did it as well because the shelves were empty and I'm like, well, what am I going to put on my what am I going to eat if something is going wrong, like so I ended up buying stuff that was just left over that I still have in my freezer to this
Yes.
day. And it's so funny that kind of mentality that we can get sucked into of not enough, and instantly you don't think about how your choices may impact the other person. Like, are you taking what you need, or are you taking more than what you need selfishly?
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like each of us, our little island and protecting our, selves and making sure everybody else is, it's like you deal with you. It's like the dog eat dog mentality,
I
it's
think we
fundamental to capitalism, really.
Well, I think we got a little bit of a wake up call to the level of our own consciousness when that happened. I think, and I say this about probably all of us. I think there are a much smaller group that was in the camp of let me help you, or can I help you with something. And I heard some really beautiful stories of, neighbors coming together and helping out the elderly, making sure they had food when they couldn't go to the grocery store because they're at risk, and things like that. I saw the birth of that coming through humanity, which was really beautiful, but I also saw the polar opposite of it. And I think it was a little bit of a wake up call for all of us to kind of see, oh, when we're really put to the test, when the hammer drops,
Yeah.
how are we truly going to react?
Yeah. It's interesting too, though, Nicole. I going back to storytelling, we tell the stories on our news 95% of the negative stories. If we
Mhm.
saw the stories of the people helping each other way more, then our perspective would be like, oh, COVID. I mean, think if it was like, okay, we're just going to tell 90% positive stories. We're just, the negative stories are, I mean, who's making these decisions? It's like the negative stories are what is seemingly important and the positive stories aren't. What if we just flip that? The negative stories are just not really, we just don't see them as important as the positive ones. And then we tell positive stories. And then our perspective of our reality and our world is really completely different because there's beautiful things going on all the time that we're helping each other do and giving money and, all kinds of stuff that is lovely happening and we don't hear about it. What if we did that? How much difference would it make in how we see ourselves and the world? And what stories would we be talking about to
Here's
each
the thing
other?
about that. I completely agree with you, but here's the thing about that. We live in a society that is reactionary to their trauma.
Right,
And so when they see something horrifying happening on the news, it captures them, it captivates them because it activates that trauma of like, oh no, there's almost like an addiction to trauma that
right.
we live in
Yes,
and not an addiction to the healed aspects. I see that shifting. I think there are people who are starting to realize, I just don't want that in my life anymore. I
right,
think it's going to come down to the onus is, of course, on all of us, not the news, not the corporations running it, but on
right.
us to choose what am I going to feel compelled to put my energy and attention to?
Yeah,
Because ultimately, whatever we're seeing in the world is a reflection of what's happening within us. And so the more that we're not dealing with our own trauma and we're allowing the trauma to rule our subconscious and the way that we think and our belief systems, the more we're going to gravitate towards doom and gloom. And that goes for alternative media as well. I see it on both sides of the aisle,
yeah,
and it's not serving to the betterment of anyone's health whatsoever.
yeah,
So I think that it comes from an addiction that is trauma based to that we just somehow get sucked in. And I think the only way to beat that is to turn within, start looking at your own trauma, start healing that so that you feel less addicted to it, so that you feel less like almost like there's like a gravitational pull
yeah.
that now starts to take you towards the thing that actually makes you feel good because you're more aligned with it,
That's
right? Like attracts like. And
yeah,
so when we're having all of those underlying frequencies within us that we haven't taken a look at, those are invisibly pulling us towards that kind of stuff and feeding it further.
yeah.
So I really think it comes down to us.
It does, and I think and this is where I'm going to be really, really. Just ask everybody, please support alternative content. Support alternative storytellers, spiritual storytellers. It's funny because Pixar has been just raking it in, doing an amazing, amazing business with spiritual storytelling for kids. Soul, Frozen 2, Encanto. I mean, these movies have really deep spiritual aspects to them, and kids are just eat. And it's like, why can't we have that? Why do we have to have this like, eat shit out of a shoe? It's like, why do Pixar gets to have, the kids are getting to have this beautiful programming. And so support that which uplifts, support, spiritual fiction. It's not even considered a genre in traditional publishing. I feel like, a friend of mine here in Arkansas where I live, he says, you're sod busting, it's like, because it's not even considered a genre. And spiritual film and TV and so there are hopefully some streaming services coming out that aren't just documentaries, because there's a lot of that documentaries and there's a lot of spiritual nonfiction, but we got to have stories, because like you said, people want their stories. Everybody wants to sit down in the evening and watch or read a really fun story, or something that moves them, or something that is just entertaining.
It's
And
a
so
major connection point.
yes, it is. And so please support the people who are doing this work. I am trying to get this book to be successful enough so that I have a platform to be able to say, yes, there can be, hopefully it can be a movie, and then have some, like this should be a television series. I have so many ideas. I know so many people have so many ideas. And in Hollywood, I just had talked to a director producer the other day who said, "Oh, I so want to create uplifting content, but I make horror movies because that's where the money is." That just sums it up completely. It's like we've got to support the uplifting content. And I have to say, please forgive Will Smith because he's one of the only people who really has committed to creating uplifting content, and he had a trauma response. And but he's just somebody. He's trying to make The Alchemist. I don't know if it'll even get made now. So yeah, but it's so wild that he ended up in that situation when he's such a supporter of truly uplifting, inspiring content. And we just saw his trauma spill out all over the place in uh, the world
Yeah,
stage.
it's interesting that the whole Oscar episode there between him and Chris Rock. I mean, I don't watch any of that stuff anymore because, well, one, it's just always been boring, but two, I just there's so much within that industry that you just don't really want to support.
Right.
But there it doesn't to say that though, the whole industry isn't completely tarnished. There are, like you said, I'm sure there are good people in that industry,
Oh yeah.
but it's just so hard to break through that. But going back to that point, I personally didn't care. I didn't care one way or the other whether he was right or he was wrong. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, that was wrong," or "He was right," or I really don't care. I don't care. Like it really didn't matter to me because I think there's one thing that people have to understand is that we all make mistakes in our life. We all have reactions. And if we're going to judge someone else so harshly, it says something about us, more importantly. And I think that whole episode is between Will and Chris.
Yeah. Yeah.
And only those two.
Right.
Let them figure it out,
Right.
It doesn't involve me. I don't care.
Yeah.
There are other way more important things I need to be thinking about.
Yeah.
But I think that comes down to it is like, why do we feel the need to get involved in other people's lives so much to the point where we have to have an opinion on it and our opinion has to be heard or right?
Yeah.
It's part of the whole cancel culture problem.
Right.
Like, just, understand we're all human. We're all going to have mistakes, and just let the people who are involved figure it out.
Yeah.
It's between the people who experienced it.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe you watched it and you experienced something along that line, but you know, uh, you have to have enough energetic sovereignty within your own field to not be pulled into that stuff and be able to separate yourself from what is you and what isn't you.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. One thing that I found from my perspective is that was fascinating about it was that it was Chris Rock saying really unkind words as a joke, and then Will Smith using violence as retribution. And these, you know, group of people in that building, everybody is just like aghast, or whatever. It's like, and now coming out and everybody's just like, how could he? And all this judgment. And all they do is make content, almost all they do is make content that is filled with horrible, horrible things people saying to each other and violence at way, 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 way worse levels than somebody slapping somebody. So I thought that was such an ironic
Very ironic.
So ironic that it's like, wow. I mean, it felt like it just played out in this little microcosm exactly what that industry is showing us all the time. And then we have to deal with it in real life. And it's like, oh my God, how could that be? And it's just fascinating to me. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're putting like blood, gore, and guts on the screen, and you think that that's just like this, and you're being judgmental. I mean, you're creating the very thing that you're judging. So that really was an interesting aspect of it to me sociologically, from that perspective of like this anthropological, sociological,
Hmm.
fascination. So, yeah. So, that's what is, I'm trying to do is bring the light, just bring the light into the world, give people uplifting, fun entertainment, which I know we can do. I know we can do better. And I'm not saying take away all of it, but my God, we could do 70-30. Can we have 30% uplifting entertainment or 40? It's like you can keep your serial killers and your, whatever, all that, Game of Thrones, cutting people's body parts off, whatever. And have some of this too. And there's just so much. It's like, oh my gosh, can you imagine having biopics about, you know, uh, yogi masters, like, and Ramana Maharshi or Nisargadatta, or, like what about a biopic about somebody who isn't famous, is an alcoholic, gets abused, ends up fucking everybody in their life over and then dies a horrible death, whatever death at the end. It's like, that's what mostly our biopics are about. And, we could have like these incredibles. How many people just are watching this, have fascinating stories, spiritual stories in their lives that they've lived, I mean, the growth stories. It's like
Everyone has at least a story
exactly. A
at
story.
minimum.
Yes. I mean, it's
Mhm.
endless the amount. And it's not about Pollyanna stuff. It's about hip, edgy, cool, modern, real people doing real stuff, facing adversity, and real challenges, or a sci-fi, epic. There's so much possibility. I have an idea for a really fun comedy, episodic television comedy that would be a spiritual comedy and just be irreverent and a blast, and filled with people who have, who are flawed but real and on a spiritual path, like the rest of us. We're all just trying to work it out in this mad world. So yeah, I just feel like there's such opportunity. We're just at the beginning of it, and that's what's so exciting. This is all new. How much on this planet is really new? And this is new. This possibility, what I'm talking about, is really, really something that's unique. We can do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's important to just, the onus always comes back to self. And I've made it, a very conscious choice. I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned through 2020, 2021 was how easy it is to get addicted to someone else's narrative, and how destructive those narratives can be to your own well-being.
Yeah.
And I decided I just don't want to have my focus or my energy going into that anymore, because I know I'm contributing to it just by my energy. And I mean, this may sound crazy, but I know how powerful I am on a conscious level. I know that if I'm giving my energy to something, I have to be really responsible with it. And so to pull it back and focus in on things that I know can be beneficial to this world has been a really big mission for me since probably like mid 2021. So we're coming up to almost a year now, and it's really changed things for me. And I personally, I know a lot of people see all the crap going on. Sometimes I have friends who tell me all the things that are still going wrong and all the horrors of the world.
Yeah.
I don't see all of that because I'm not choosing to engage with it. I see an awakening within our collective. I'm seeing more people interested in healing than ever before.
Yes.
I see people wanting better for themselves. And I want to be there for those people who are truly ready.
Right.
And if I'm not in the right space to hold a vibration that those people will need, then I can't be of service in the way that I want to be in service. And so everyone holds a personal responsibility. Remember that the world is simply a reflection of what is going on within you.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more healed you become and the more content you become in your own life with who you are and how you're living your life, the less of all that stuff you're going to see because it doesn't mirror you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely true. It's so true. I mean, life smooths out a lot when in deep surrender, and deep self awareness, awareness of self, abiding in the self, the big S self,
Mm.
and letting go of our trauma, healing the shadow material in our psyches, working, doing the work to clear that material. And I'm so excited because I'm really, really hoping that we get to write a prequel to Awake and write what happens during the ravaging era, that when the wise ones walk away, go to the vital zones, and then actual practices that they do to help each other to heal and to grow and to facilitate the awakening on the planet. I just think, I mean, there's so much cool material that could be there. So
Yeah. Oh, I hope you do because I'm already enjoying what I'm reading so far. I highly suggest to my audience you may really want to consider picking up a copy of Awake. It has, to me, I'm picking up, and I've only read a couple chapters, but I'm kind of picking up Celestine prophecy energy in this book. So, and that was an extremely pivotal book for me in my own awakening.
yeah,
That awakened some of my own codes of understanding my connection to the Incas, the Mayans, all of that. And so you've got this beautiful connection to the Mayan culture in
yes,
here, which I am a huge fan of. I'm considering in the next month going back down to the Mayan Riviera for my birthday.
mm-hmm.
And so I think you guys would really enjoy it and love it. The storytelling is phenomenal. And of course, it's always beautiful when we can support our fellow soul family and, raising the frequency of this planet, helping others. I think it expands the mind and it also opens the heart, which is so important. So are there any final words that you would like to leave the audience with before we close out the show, Dayna?
Well, one thing is that I've been realizing is that, first of all, spiritual people often don't read fiction. So I'm telling you guys, read some fiction, support storytelling. And it's on audiobook because everybody's so busy that people can just sit down and read. They're like, oh, I need my 7-minute YouTube video. And so it's on audiobook. It's fabulously narrated by our narrator's amazing, and so you can listen to it in the car or making dinner or whatever. And so it's available in those ways. And just, yeah, any spiritual content that comes along in story, film, TV, like, just really support that. Any kind of streaming service that comes along that's telling you that they're going to provide story, spiritual story, uplifting story. I'm talking to some people who are trying to do that right now, create a streaming service for spiritual storytelling. So, yeah, that is it.
Wonderful.
Access the
Wonderful.
wisdom, make the leap, access the wisdom.
Well, I'm excited to read the rest of the novel, and yes, there it is. Everyone, go pick up a copy of Awake.
It's pretty.
Support a fellow light worker who's doing great work. You will not be disappointed with the writing. I promise you that. I am actually. I love fiction.
Mm,
I was a huge book reader when I was younger, so I'm really enjoying it.
good.
And I know you guys will too. So I'm going to leave all the links in the description below in the podcast and below this video so you can easily get access to that book. And if you need to contact Dayna, I will leave
Neat.
all of her information
Yeah.
below. Thank you so much, Dayna. And of course, tell Julie we missed that she wasn't here with us, but tell her we're sending her lots of love and I hope she feels better. And guys, I love you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll be back with you next week. Thanks again for joining me for another show on the Enlighten Up podcast. I love you guys so much for all of your continued support. So remember to raise your vibe, find your tribe, and be open to the infinite possibilities held in the mysteries that surround us all. Thanks again for sharing the show with your family and friends. And if you're new to the show and you need to find out more information about me, please head on over to my website, NicoleFrolick.com, where you can join my newsletter. And please follow me on Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube. Keep your light bright, and I'll see you next week.